Welcome back to Discipleship, and today I'm interviewing Bryan Davis. How are you, Bryan?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Bryan Davis is the author of Dragons in Our Midst and the Oracles of Fire book series, and also quite a few other book series. So, Mr. Bryan, if you wouldn't mind, could you please give us a little bit of your testimony and like how you started writing books?
Before I started writing, I was a computer professional in all sorts of programming and tech work and so forth. And my kids were all homeschooled, all seven of them, and they did not like to write. They were good in all sorts of other academics, but they didn't like to write. And even though I wasn't a writer at the time, I knew the importance of writing. If you can learn to write well, you can learn to express your ideas in a cogent and coherent manner so that people can be persuaded, and you'll go far in life just by being able to do that. So I wanted to teach them how to write. So I started writing a story with them. So we started writing a story together. I got them involved with the creative process, and it worked really well. All of my kids are good writers now. But what I didn't expect was this would ignite a passion in me to write. Because I saw how powerful storytelling could be. And we know that Jesus taught with stories, right? Parables.
Yeah.
Because he knew that we're kind of wired for stories. We remember stories. And if we remember a story, we'll remember the lesson behind the story, we hope. So I wanted to start writing stories because as a computer guy, I didn't feel like I was making that much of a spiritual impact on the world. It's a good job, but what was I leaving behind? I mean, I've been a full-time author now for 21 years, and you can probably guess how many of my computer programs I wrote are still in use, right? None. So that's not much of an impact. So I wanted to make a bigger impact. So I decided I wanted to become a novelist. I started studying how to write stories. I was already good at grammar and such. I wanted to learn how to tell better stories. Well, about 2 years into this process, one night I had a weird dream about a boy who could breathe fire. And I told my oldest son about it. And he said, he was 13 years old at the time. And he said, you should write a story about this boy who can breathe fire, because then it'd be a lot better than that other stuff you've been writing. Well, first I said, thanks a lot, son. But he said, it's because it would be a fantasy story. And I love fantasy stories. So we brainstormed, how could a boy breathe fire? And we came up with the idea that eventually became the Dragons in Our Midst series. But it took a long time to get published because I still wasn't a very good writer. I got more than 200 rejections from publishers. And so one night I said to God, I don't remember if it was out loud, but it was certainly in prayer. What am I doing wrong? Why am I getting all these rejections? I thought you gave me this dream. And I felt like God was saying, trust me as much as those characters in your story. Trust me. So I said, okay, how about if I quit my job and pursue this with only you to hold me up? I have 7 kids, mortgage on a house. Lord, I'm going to trust in you. So I quit my job. And, for 8 years, I had no book contracts. Within 1 year of making that decision, I had contracts for 6 books. God honored that. He honored my faith in him. And now it's been 21 years since I made that full-time writing decision. And I now have, I think, 39 or 40 novels. And God has seen me through it all.
I love that in your books, you're great at portraying having the faith they have in God. And also your books are just like, you're great at showing like what sacrifice is, and stuff on forgiveness and sacrifice is really good because there's a lot of other books I've read about this sort of thing, of authors trying to get like sacrifice into their stories and stuff like that. But your books are definitely the best ones I've read for these sort of to these topics and stuff.
Thank you for that. To me, the two most powerful themes in stories, you named them both, or sacrificial love and forgiveness. And that's exactly what I want to communicate, and you picked it up. Very good.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start with the questions, and these questions are some of them are just about you and yourself and like what your favorite Bible verses and stuff like that, but others are about your book series. Now, me personally, I've read your Oracles of Fire series and I think your Starlight series, and now I'm reading your Dragons in the Mist series because I realized I read them out of order. But some of these are going to be, I've noticed some stuff from your book series that I was like, that reminds me of some stuff because I'm homeschooled as well, and I have a lot of time to read throughout the day. I'll be on break and stuff, and so I found some of these things that are pretty interesting in your book, so I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
All right, so the first question was, what made you use, in the Oracles of Fire series, you have Enoch as a prophet who's coming in throughout the series and helping like the main characters and showing up through the ovum. But what made you want to use Enoch as a prophet in your series?
Because he's such a unique character. We see in the Bible that apparently he never died. It says that God took him, apparently because of his righteousness. And we also know that he was a prophet. Jude, the book of Jude, and I think verse 14 talks about him being a prophet, preaching to the unrighteous at the time. So I thought, well, if he was a prophet then and he never died, why can't I keep him as a prophet? And it was fun. And just imagining, I read a lot of background material on Enoch. I don't know how much of it's true. If you've heard of the book of Enoch.
Oh, yes.
It's not in the canon, not a biblical book, but it's fascinating. What I don't know if any of it's true or how much of it's true, but the book of Jude actually quotes from the book of Enoch. So that means that the apostles at least put some weight on it and revered the book, even though we don't consider it scripture. And it was a wild time, apparently, back when Enoch was preaching.
Yeah.
And so he probably went through a lot, and I just thought he'd be fun to bring in as somebody who never died. Because he's so unique, I think.
Yeah. And that's another thing, reading your books, I was like, some of this stuff, most of the stuff from your book series was just completely, it was like based off, you had a bunch of biblical characters, but then you look and I noticed a few things and I was like, I think that's from the book of Enoch. I've seen this. I got a friend and he loves the book of Enoch because he's interested in Bigfoot and that sort of thing. And you've got the Nephilim, and that's one of the theories, is that the Nephilim are what could have been these Bigfoot. But I wanted to ask, I don't know if I can pronounce this name correctly, but in your book series, you have these ape men called the Caitiff, I think is how you pronounce it.
There's no L in there. It's just Caitiff.
Caitiff, okay.
Caitiff.
All right, so you have the Caitiff in your book, and I want you to know, what was the inspiration behind them for your book series?
Well, having 7 kids, children are so precious to me, and taking care of them and treating them right is, the ultimate. Jesus, said, "Suffer the children to come unto me." He loved the children, and we know that the angels watch over the children. And these days, children are like becoming like fodder and experiments and being killed in the womb. And those who mistreat them like that, Jesus said it'd be better for them if a millstone were hung around their neck and they were cast in the deepest sea. So the fate of children is paramount to the Lord. So I portrayed the Caitiff as those who are miserable, cowardly wretches who would actually hurt children. And I wanted to show that God has, I think, will have a special punishment for those who hurt kids. So that's why I invented these horrible, wretched creatures, cowardly. So the word Caitiff means cowardly wretch. So that's why I did it.
Yeah, I noticed that, and I was like, oh, this is I was trying to figure out what the name caitiff meant, and then I looked up and I was like, oh, well, this actually describes them very well. And yeah, so another question I had was, uh, well, if I can find it, just right here. So I noticed you used Excalibur from the Legends of Arthur, and I noticed you also used the Lady in the Lake, and that was like when I read that your story and that story, I was like, wow, he did a really good job of blending this all together with the Legends stuff. But I wanted to know what made you want to use, this is sort of one of the just on the spot questions, but what made you want to use Excalibur as like this weapon for all the characters throughout the story to use, as it's like this sword that's like always there when they need it. Like, so what way did you wanted to use that?
Well, Excalibur is a well-known part of the King Arthur legends. Nobody really knows how much of those legends were true or not. There probably was a man who, in that time, who became the legendary King Arthur, and the myth legend of the sword goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. The Book of Adam and Eve, it talks about a sword that was. I believe even the Bible talks about a sword that the cherubim used to guard the tree of life. And supposedly, according to some of the legends, that sword is Excalibur. So you follow that throughout all of history, and it's just such an interesting idea that a sword could be used in so many different legends. And when you take that and parallel that to the sword of the Spirit and its power, it just seemed to be an apt tool for a lot of illustrations, and so I decided to borrow it.
Yeah, I love how you're mixing all these different things from all these different books. You got these different legends, you've got the Bible, you've got the Book of Enoch, and you're blending them into one like great story.
Thank
So
you.
what I wanted to ask now was in your books, you talk about the Nephilim a lot. And I know in the Book of Enoch there are quite a few different descriptions of the Nephilim and stuff. And I wanted to know, this is one of those just on the spot questions. Just what do you think of the idea of Bigfoot?
Wow. I keep thinking in the interview, no one's ever going to ask me a question that I haven't been asked before, but you just did it. I think that there are probably creatures out there that we don't know about, we don't understand. But Bigfoot, or Sasquatch as they're sometimes call it, I just don't know. I wouldn't know. I mean, there are a lot of fakes out there too, so it's really hard to know. So I'm just gonna have to pass on that. I don't know about Bigfoot.
Yeah, there's a lot of just people faking it out there, but there are certain I think theories and also some stuff going through that with the Book of Enoch, how a lot of people nowadays think the Bigfoot are just a race of Nephilim, because people who have had encounters and stuff say it's like not an animal. But if it is real, most likely, who knows what it could be? Probably just some species of animal we haven't discovered yet, because I mean, we're discovering new animals every day.
Sure, that's something I never knew. I never knew that some people think that the Sasquatch were related to the Nephilim.
Yeah.
Think about that.
All right, so I've got, I think, a couple more questions. These ones are more directed toward you now. So I wanted to know, who is your favorite Bible character?
I mean, Jesus is obvious. You want somebody else?
Yeah. Besides Jesus,
Oh, it just depends on who I'm reading at the time. When I'm reading through the book of Acts and just watching the Apostle Paul and what he went through, is just his faith and his determination. I mean, he was all about the gospel. There's nothing else besides preaching the gospel. So I love that. And so in the New Testament, I usually go back to the Apostle Paul. In the Old Testament, I really relate well to Jeremiah, the weeping prophet who suffered a lot to tell the truth, and the people around him hated him because of it. And I relate to that, because if you tell the truth, even in religious circles, they'll get persecuted. So it's I've experienced that. When I first brought the fantasy books out, Raising Dragons came out in 2004. There was no other Christian fantasy being published by Christian publishers. Narnia was published by a secular publisher. So I was met with a lot of resistance. People telling me that fantasy is of the devil, and telling me I'm going to hell for what I'm writing. And these are all Christians. These are all church groups. So getting persecution, I mean, it's mild compared to some persecution, but it's still persecution anyway. It comes from the people who are supposed to show grace and kindness and love. It's difficult, and that's what Jeremiah went through, and so I relate to him.
Yeah, Jeremiah is definitely my favorite prophet. Also, he's got I love that Bible verse that says, it's in Jeremiah, and it says, someone asked him, why don't you just stop? Why don't you just stop while you're preaching? And he says, if I don't preach it, God's word burns like a fire in my bones. I have to let it out.
I love that verse. My favorite verse in Jeremiah.
All right, so I've got 3 more questions here, and this one's also just for, you can show multiple verses for this, but I wanted to know, what is your favorite Bible verse, or like verses, if you like multiple from different books?
When we talk about Paul, I think I mentioned his passion for the gospel. And in Philippians, when he said that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, and the fellowship of his suffering, being conformed to his death. That is the statement. That's kind of his truth statement that drives him forward. That everything that he is, it's all about knowing Jesus. And the more he suffers, the more he knows him better. So that's what allowed him to get through these times of suffering, whether it's being nearly drowning or being stoned or whatever. He says, I know Jesus better now because I suffered for him. So that passage is amazing. Another one by Paul's in Romans 5, where did I mention the chapter for the other one, Philippians 3, but Romans 5, where he says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And that just magnifies the love that God has for us. That while we were yet sinners, I mean, we were horrible, and he still died for us. So that's probably what fuels the passion to be like Jesus, is to have that much love, to be willing to die for someone who hates you. And so he transformed us. You know the gospel. I don't have to tell you all that.
No, that's...
No, anyway, those 2 verses mean a lot to me.
Romans is an amazing book. I know we did a Bible study on it last night, and we tried to do 2 chapters in 1 hour. I mean, it was like, there was so much, there's so much wisdom and so much great, so many great Bible verses in Romans. I mean, and Paul is just, he was amazing. His background, where he came from, and how Jesus transformed him, it just shows how forgiving God is. That
yeah, was he a sinner? Oh yeah.
All right, so I wanted to ask another one about, you have the dragons who are throughout your book series, and I want to know, in your book series, I also see you talk about Job, in the book of Job, where they're reading about the fire-breathing dragon in Job. And I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Kent Hovind, but yeah, he does a lot of different stuff on Job. I think he has like a whole sermon on just what they were talking about there with the fire-breathing dragon. And so I wanted to know, what made you really want to use dragons throughout your whole series, just to add those in, just other than they're awesome to have as characters in book and fantasy series.
I mentioned it briefly early on that I had that dream about a boy who could breathe fire.
Oh yeah.
And when my son and I were brainstorming the story, we were thinking, how could a boy breathe fire? And my son said his parents are fire-breathing dragons. And I said, but dragons don't have human children. He said, well, they can if they're transformed into humans. And so we were just brainstorming. So I came up with the idea to use dragons simply because of the dream about a boy who could breathe fire. So the dragons weren't especially prominent in my thinking, but they became so because of the dream and the brainstorming. So that prompted me to do research on dragons and where the legends came from. And it turns out that nearly every ancient culture has stories about dragons separate from each other. And of course, Job 41 talks about Leviathan. It's clearly a fire-breathing creature. So it seems to me that they were real at some time. And I don't know when they went extinct, but so they're really not mythical creatures. They're real creatures. Maybe we're not portraying them the way they actually looked, but it was fun to use a biblical creature that is an amazing animal. I mean, you think about electric eels, we know they existed. And to me, that's a fire-breathing dragon isn't any more remarkable than an electric eel. So I just thought it'd be fun to do because of the dream.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love how God speaks through us through different ways. Sometimes he'll speak to us through his word and he'll speak to us through dreams, and it's wonderful. And yeah, as you said with Leviathan, I think whenever I'd read that passage of scripture, I'd be like, what would it be like to be Job? And it'd be like, you have to go outside and you're like, okay, be careful when you go over here. You got this giant serpent-like creature that breathes fire and it has impenetrable scales. You got to watch out for him. I mean, that would have been
who knows what else might be out there.
Yeah. And also with when they went extinct, Dr. Kent Hovind talks to some different, don't know where it is. I think it's in the Amazon rainforest. A missionary who went there, who he was friends with a while ago, they said they still have there's been reports of these fire-breathing reptiles down there, but it's so dense in the jungle that barely anybody can get in there. So who knows what could be in these places.
And if they ever do get in, they might not come out.
Yeah, that was another thing. They kept saying if we do go in there, usually they don't return, so we try not to go in there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I only have one or two more questions, and thank you for doing this interview again. I have loved your book series. I think I read your first series in 4 days because it was just, I kept reading. It was so good.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, so second to last question is, what was your writing process for your books? Do you have a process you'd go through as you wrote your books?
Well, I'm what they call a seat of the pants writer. I do not plot in advance. I don't know what's going to happen from one moment to the next. Some people call it discovery writing, organic writing, where I usually just have a character who has a problem, and then I go from there. Billy's breath is getting hot, and I know that that's all I have, and I'll start writing about Billy's breath getting hotter and hotter. So my writing process is really extremely inventive. As to me, it's exciting because I get to go on the adventure with the characters. It's not drudgery at all. I look forward to it, and sometimes I go, "Whoa, what am I going to do now? The villain has done this, and my hero doesn't know what to do." And so it's fun being able to solve these dilemmas along with the characters. Is that what you mean by writing process?
Yes, so that's what I'm.
Okay.
And that's great. And I will have for school. My mom's like, okay, for this today, I want you to write a story, and it's like you need to plot this. And the whole time I'm like, I don't know how to plot this out. I'll write something for school, and I'll be like, okay, if I need to write a story, I'm just gonna go along with it, see what happens, see what pops into my mind as I'm writing. But
I've never plotted a story.
all right, so I got one final question for you. It is, so in your books, I wanted to know what made you want. So you've got Martin, I think is his name, in your Oracles of Fire series, and he tries to sort of meld heaven, earth, and Hades all together into one. I want to know what made you want to have him sort of connect all those places. What gave you the idea for that?
Well, as you know, the Tower of Babel was a real thing, and I've always wondered what was the motivation behind it. I mean, did you really think building a tower was going to do this? You can really think that going high up in the air is a way to get to God? It seemed to me to be unlikely. That needed to be more than that. It was probably a matter of the heart and defiance. So I wanted to come up with a character. So I did research on Nimrod from that ancient time and Valley of Shinar, and found out that there was a real guy named Martin and Semiramis. They're real from the histories. So I decided to make Martin a mad scientist who was behind the whole thing. That he wanted to bring different worlds, alternate realities together. And so to him, it was a grand experiment and not just a building. So it was really the motivation behind the tower that drove me to figure out. Of course, I don't believe that Martin really, the real Martin really wanted to do that. But so I made up a fantastical idea of why this Martin character wanted to do that. But it was fun studying and researching these people because a lot of people don't know when they read that book that Martin and Semiramis were real. Now, of course, they weren't, as I fantasticalized them, but it was fun doing that research and coming up with a motivation.
Yeah, that's great. And reading your books, I've noticed like all these different things, and I'm like, wow, I've never heard anybody else like say that in their book series, like with the fire-breathing dragons from Job and stuff like that. Like, I mean, at our church we have debates over that all the time. It's like, what? Oh, wait, could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, my mic was turned down way low. I just realized.
It did get a little quieter.
Yeah, but we have debates on that. It's like, was this a fire-breathing dragon? I'm like, I don't see how it can't be, but I just love seeing somebody else having that in their books and stuff. And with the Tower of Babel and how you're saying, you really think you can just build a tower out of heaven? I mean, like, I know these people weren't stupid. They could, being able to build something like that, you had to think about the structure and stuff. And so that's what's always made me think it might have had some sort of spiritual significance.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, well, I wanted to thank you for doing this interview again. It's been great, and you've had some amazing answers to these questions. And I hope we can do another one sometime in the future.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you for spreading the word about my books. And if anyone wants to check out my books, just go to my website, daviscrossing.com, DAVIS crossing.com. And it's been a pleasure. You're a good interviewer.
Thank you. Well, thank you again for doing this interview. And I'll have the link to your website in the description. I look forward to reading more of your books.
All right, let me know when you got a link. I'll check it out, and I'll put it on my Facebook page.
All right, thank you again.
All right, have a good day.
God bless. Goodbye.